And it's just one second. Okay, we'll move along with our chapters that relate to the Ministry of Government Relations here today. I'd like to welcome all the officials that have joined us here today and all those that will have been connected to the work that we'll be discussing here today. I'd invite at this time Mr. Dene, Acting Deputy Minister, to briefly introduce the officials that are with him here today, maybe refrain from any further comments. At that time, we'll kick it over to the Auditor, and then you'll have a chance to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to committee members. Just before I get into the introductions, I just want committee members to know that we, like many across this province, our thoughts and our minds are elsewhere in the province. With regards to the events the horrific events that happened this past weekend, and so that's really where our heads and our hearts are. But of course, we are here before the committee, and we are prepared to answer as best we can the questions of the committee, with regards to the provincial auditor's recommendations. So. In terms of introductions, I have with me today Sheldon Green, who is the Assistant Deputy Minister of Municipal Relations. I have Jeff Markowich, Acting Assistant Deputy Minister of Central Services and Standards. And in behind me, in no particular order, maybe they can just give a wave, is Brad Henry, Executive Director, Northern Municipal Services. Jeff McDonald, Executive Director, Municipal Infrastructure and Finance. Rod Nazowicz, Executive Director, Policy and Program Services. Bonnie Chambers, Executive Director, Advisory Services and Municipal Relations. And my name is Laurier Donnet, Acting Deputy Minister of Government Relations, First Nations, Métis and Northern Affairs.
Thank you, and thank you for identifying where your hearts and minds are here today. I think that's where everyone's are, and certainly your officials connect to communities and people all across this province. So we appreciate that. That's where your minds are at. I'll table at this time PAC 7229 Ministry of Government Relations status update, dated September 6, 2022, and thank you to those that put together that status update as well. And now I'll turn it over to the Provincial Auditor to present on the respective chapters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Deputy Chair, committee members and officials. With me today is Carolyn O'Quinn, the Assistant Provincial Auditor, who was previously responsible for the portfolio of work that did include the Ministry of Government Relations and the chapters being considered. Carolyn will present the 3 chapters on the agenda in the order they do appear. In between each chapter, she will pause to allow for the committee's discussion and deliberation. There is no new recommendations for the committee's consideration. Before I turn it over, I do want to thank ministry officials and management for the cooperation that was extended to us during the course of our work. With that, I'll turn it over to Carolyn.
Thank you, Chair. Chapter 15 of our 2021 report, Volume 1, which starts on page 189, provides the results of our follow-up audit on providing safe drinking water in northern settlements as of March of 2021. So our first outstanding recommendation was for the Ministry of Government Relations to take prompt action to address problems in providing safe drinking water to northern settlements. As at March 2021, the ministry began implementing strategies to resolve significant drinking water issues for the northern settlements of Uranium City and Brebant Lake, which have been outstanding since 2001 and 2018, respectively. The ministry was in the process of securing funding for upgrades to the Uranium City water treatment plant and was actively upgrading Brebant Lake's water treatment facility, with further upgrades being planned. It was also working with the First Nation responsible for the water system for Stanley Mission and the federal government on upgrading the water system to address issues with trihalomethane levels. This recommendation remained partially implemented at March 2021. Taking corrective action to resolve drinking water issues timely is essential to ensure the safety of drinking water being consumed by residents. Our second recommendation was for the Ministry of Government Relations to test drinking water samples and document the results as required by its water system permits issued by the Water Security Agency. We found the Ministry of Government Relations did not consistently test and document the results of testing of drinking water samples as required by its permits. For 304 drinking water tests we examined, we did find that all daily, bi-monthly, monthly, and biannual water quality tests were completed, but 5% of weekly and 14% of quarterly tests were not all completed in accordance with the related permit. This recommendation remained partially implemented. Completing drinking water tests as required by permits is essential to ensuring the safety of drinking water being consumed by Northern residents. So our third and fourth recommendations were for the Ministry of Government Relations to consistently carry out all required maintenance for its water systems and to document its monthly supervision of maintenance carried out on its water systems to evidence that all required maintenance was occurring. We found the ministry did not consistently complete maintenance nor document its completion of the monitoring of maintenance carried out on each of its water systems. These two recommendations remained partially implemented. Not having consistent and timely maintenance increases the risk of providing unsafe drinking water to Northern residents. This concludes our remarks on this chapter.
Thank you for the focus of the report and the consistency in following up to see this through to implementation. I turn it over to the Deputy Minister for brief remarks, and then we'll have some questions.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as the Provincial Auditor indicated, this chapter sets out the results of the third follow-up of management's actions on the 4 remaining recommendations from the 2012 report and the audit of the Ministry's processes to provide safe drinking water to Northern settlements. Provincial Auditor found that the Ministry had partially implemented 4 of the remaining recommendations, and Ministry notes that it has made progress on those 4 remaining recommendations as follows. So number 1, taking prompt action to address problems in providing safe drinking water to Northern settlements. Just wanted to update the committee on corrective action that has taken place. So in February 2022, the Ministry completed an infrastructure improvement project for Stanley Mission. The Ministry is delivering an infrastructure improvement project for Brabant Lake, which is to be completed by December of this year. And in Uranium City, a consultant is performing a treatment upgrade feasibility study to identify water treatment options, and the Ministry is installing treated water meters to sort of monitor the flow into and out of that system to quantify the current system's capacity. Number 2, the testing of drinking water samples and documenting the results as required by water system permits issued by the Water Security Agency in areas where the Ministry or in areas where the municipality operates water systems. The Ministry continues to work with municipalities to ensure drinking water samples are tested and documented as required by the operating permit. To ensure the accuracy and reliability of test results, the Ministry is improving the packaging of water quality tests to prevent them from being damaged during transport. And the Ministry is establishing water testing procedures for water treatment plant operators to follow to improve the accuracy and reliability of water quality test results. The third recommendation, consistently carry out all required maintenance for its water systems. The Ministry is establishing requirements for water treatment plant operators to follow to ensure scheduled maintenance is carried out and correctly documented. To improve the day-to-day maintenance of water treatment systems, the Ministry is exploring options to increase the technical capacity of water treatment plant operators, and the Ministry is reviewing the terms of the Circuit Rider Program, which is a training program, to ensure the deliverables align with the Provincial Auditor's recommendations. And finally, the fourth recommendation, document its monthly supervision of maintenance carried out on its water systems to evidence that all required maintenance is occurring. The process improvements for maintenance and reporting requirements have ensured that maintenance issues are being performed and documented as per the Ministry's expectations. The Ministry has built capacity to manage its water systems, to manage maintenance requirements, and to facilitate their timely completion more effectively. Ministry now considers this recommendation to be implemented. And that concludes our remarks on this chapter, and we're pleased to answer any questions.
Thanks for the presentation and the work, importantly, on this front to see these through to implementation. I'll open it up to committee members for questions. Ms. Young?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, officials, for all being here today to present on the important work of this chapter and the 2 subsequent chapters. Understanding this is a follow-up. I do have just a couple questions in regards to some of the metrics shared in the introductory comments, just to get an understanding of the current state of affairs. Specific to the Ministry of Government Relations, how many individuals would there be working specifically on this file?
Answer from one of our officials here.
Good afternoon. Sheldon Green, Assistant Deputy Minister, Municipal Relations Division. Thank you for the question. We'd have about 6 people out of our Larange office that have varying components of among multiple of their duties, but to assist in supporting that this work gets done across the settlements. And the 5 water systems that the ministry is responsible for, as well as 2 that are managed in partnership with First Nations. And then on the ground in those individual communities, there are occasional contract people that will help do the water treatment plant operations, technical work, and water testing.
Thank you. And then one last clarification question, and this may be for officials, this may be for the auditor's office. Noting in the introduction the settlements and the number of dwellings served, but also noting that there's an exclusion of some northern settlements from the scope of this audit. Does anyone know how many are excluded? And if I'm right in reading that, those that are excluded because they don't have water systems at all?
Correct. Like, so we didn't, if they almost didn't have a public, like, drinking water distribution type a water treatment plant, that wasn't in, right? Yeah. So it'd be no different than like a farm, right? Having their own well concept,
sure. And do you have a sense of how many dwellings what percentage of people or dwellings are we talking about included in this versus? Yeah.
I don't. Yeah.
That's okay. Thanks. Moving on to the recommendations themselves, and thank you so much for the timely update on the state of these. Perhaps looking at some of the work specific to Uranium City, Stanley Mission, and forgive my southern pronunciation. Is it Brabant Lake? Brabant. Thank you so much. With the funding listed in the introduction for those projects, I believe it noted in March 2021, the ministry was in the process of securing $1.7 million in funding for upgrades to Uranium City. Obviously, that funding was secured.
Secured. That's sort of preliminary estimates. Is that it? Yeah.
That provincial funding, federal. What's the nature of that funding source, or was the nature, I suppose?
Actually, total project funding. So contributions from the federal government, provincial government, and municipal.
Okay. And then the 1.5 associated with Brabant Lake. it's noted as an estimate in the introductory notes. But I see in the actions that contract was awarded and construction is underway.
Actually, the most recent estimates on that is 1.65 million funding.
And would that also be a combination of provincial, federal?
It would be, yes.
Okay. And I suppose same question for Stanley Mission. There's, I believe, again, in the introductory paragraphs, it notes the ministry is providing approximately $1.1 million of funding for this. But the cost estimates are a total of just shy of $14 million.
Have Brad respond.
For the Stanley Mission project, this project is primarily being performed by the Stanley Mission, on behalf of Lac La Ronge Indian Band. And so $13.6 million of that funding is coming through Indigenous Services Canada from the federal government. The municipality of Stanley Mission is funding 43,000 of that amount, and 433,000 is funded through the NNTA.
Thank you. And remaining on recommendation 3.1, can you speak to the timelines for implementation provided in the update? I suppose for the first section related to Uranium City, which I note I'm relatively new to this committee, has been under a precautionary drinking water advisory for 21 years, which seems significant. With December 2023 as a timeline for implementation, is that December 2023 date a resolution of all of the issue for the drinking water advisory, or is the December 2023 date listed the end date for the actions listed under planned implementation?
That is the timeline within which we expect the actions taken to be completed. If there's infrastructure work, that can sometimes take multiple years to complete. So it depends on what the option is that comes forward out of that work.
Is there any estimated timeline then for the full resolution of the issues in Uranium City?
We wouldn't really be able to speculate until that feasibility study is complete. We've consulted with the community and come to an agreement on what the path forward is.
Okay, but that feasibility report will be completed December 2023?
That's correct.
Okay. And then this report comes back to the committee at some point in the future? Okay. Then I suppose I have the same question for the other two communities. Are the timelines for implementation listed for the remediation of the issue, or specifically for the actions for implementation, like for Brabant Lake? Is construction expected to be completed December 2022?
That's correct. For Brabant Lake, that project is expected to be completed construction by December 2022, and for that community would completely address the recommendation. With Stanley Mission, that work was completed in February 2022, and so we feel it has completely addressed that recommendation.
Okay, great. And then one. So then with Stanley Mission, forgive my attempted pronunciation, the challenges with trihalomethane are considered resolved.
That's right. Testing since the project has been complete has shown that trihalomethanes are within allowable limits.
Okay, great, thank you. And circling back to Uranium City, which I noted that E. coli was detected in the water. When was this first detected, and does it remain an ongoing challenge?
It definitely remains an ongoing challenge. I don't have a date on the top of my head for when it was became present in the system, but it is definitely an ongoing challenge. We chlorinate and test regularly in order to manage that risk.
Thank you very much. Moving on to recommendation 3.2. Understanding perhaps, or thinking I understand perhaps from the report as well as some of the actions and responses given by the ministry that there is a variety of challenges that impact testing in terms of regularity and completion. But it does appear that testing is being missed on occasion, both at the ministry level as well as at the independently operated facilities. So I suppose my question is, if then the Ministry of Government Relations is, through missing some of these testings, essentially in contravention of the WSA permits, like what's the good solve here? Is in the opinion of the officials present, do the permits need to be reevaluated, or are the permits actually fine and it's just ongoing attempts at more consistent testing that will eventually ameliorate this challenge?
We certainly don't contest the permit requirements or anything like that. They're there for a reason, and the Water Security Agency puts them in place to make sure that the drinking water is available for residents is safe, and we definitely support that. There certainly are situations where occasionally an operator may fail to submit a test, but there's lots of occasions where tests are submitted and they don't get to the testing facility in a timely manner, or they get to the testing facility and they're either frozen or damaged due to transport, and it's those sorts of issues we feel that we can make some change to. So that's what we're working on right now, improving packaging to make sure that when it's in an airplane, it doesn't freeze while it's in cargo. Those kinds of fixes, more secure packaging so they don't break, that kind of stuff. We're also working with our operators to make sure that they understand the necessity of this testing and making sure that our oversight is sufficient to ensure that we know that when these tests aren't being submitted.
Thank you. I note on page 195 of Chapter 15 in footnote 18, it speaks about the infrastructure management consulting company that the ministry utilizes to help clarify its maintenance expectations and work with operators of ministry-owned and operated water systems in regards to things like maintenance logs and documenting maintenance. Recognizing obviously some of the challenges that you've outlined in regards to remoteness and transit of samples and the challenges therein, but also 2003 is a significant duration for an ongoing relationship with one organization. Does that relationship remain positive, and is it the opinion of officials that this is still providing good value on this file?
Absolutely. We do follow standard public procurement processes for establishing our contractual relationship with that provider. So every 5 years, we do go through a public procurement process to acquire that resource, and it's been that company over that period of time. We're definitely happy with them and the work that they're providing. We absolutely rely on their technical expertise to see the successes that we have. But we do feel that the terms of the agreement could be reconsidered, or at least just to make sure that they meet the needs of all parties. And so we are planning to sit down in the near future with the executives of that organization to make sure that we're all on the same page with what we need out of this agreement.
Perfect, thank you. And is that just part of a regular review of processes and contractual obligations?
That's right.
Okay, great. Thank you. Also in recommendation 3.3, we recommend the Ministry of Government Relations consistently carry out all required maintenance for its water systems. I note in planned actions for implementation, the second one, that the ministry is exploring resourcing opportunities that will provide consistent and technical depth to the day-to-day oversight of system operations. I'm wondering if officials could expand on what that means and the outcomes anticipated, with the timeline for implementation being just a couple months from now.
Sure. So what we're doing is really extending what we said in the actions taken since the provincial auditor's report, that we're seeking to enter into regional operator agreements where we can, and expand that so that there's additional oversight over these facilities and these operations. That's primarily what that item is speaking to, and we're expecting to have that completed by December 2022.
Thank you. And then for the last recommendation in 3.3, where it notes this recommendation is considered implemented, and the ministry has internally established a single point of contact to ensure water and sewer systems related issues are handled consistently and effectively. When was this point of contact implemented?
Point of contact would have been implemented over the last couple of months.
Okay, so quite recently then.
That's right. Yeah.
And is that point of contact, is that one of the individuals who would be based out of La Ronge?
That's correct.
I believe it's noted somewhere in here that staff turnover has contributed to some challenges outlined in Chapter 15. So on a go-forward basis, can the ministry offer some comment on how staff turnover will be managed? Recognizing the single point of contact is quite new, but going forward, what the plan is?
Ultimately, that's going to be a key piece to the strategy that we're implementing in order to manage this recommendation. But ultimately, what we're establishing is, like previously, we had a model where the responsibilities were distributed across a larger number of staff, which meant that staff turnover had a more significant effect. What we're building right now is a model where we've got more centralized expertise internally, and then that way, resources who depart and come don't have as much of an impact. The other thing that those single points of contact are doing, though, is making sure that they're documenting all of their work and all of their processes, so that it's easier to transition if that person ends up moving on.
And so is that single point of contact then also the responsible party for some of the ensuring completion and the record keeping for some of the ministry-owned water systems?
That's correct, yeah, absolutely. And making sure that we're getting the logs we're expecting as well, yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Good question. Super important work. I'm glad to see some, timelines that are nearing, to have some certainty for these communities. And just to put in perspective, of course, there's a whole bunch of other communities that have water delivered through Sask Water, and of course, the Water Security Agency is the regulator for all these systems. So what's canvassed here is simply the systems that the ministry has direct responsibility for. But thank you for the work on this front. It's important on all those other fronts. I guess I would just mention as well that all those other communities as well, they need and deserve, integrity in the water system and confidence in the water that they're receiving. Any other questions? Not seeing any. At this point, I would welcome a motion to conclude consideration of this chapter. Mr. Lemay, all agreed? Agreed. That's carried. And I'll turn it over to the auditor to turn our attention to Chapter 16.
Thank you. Chapter 16 of our 2021 Report Volume 1, which starts on page 199, reports the results of our follow-up audit on recommending infrastructure projects for federal provincial funding as of October 2020. Our first outstanding recommendation was for the Ministry of Government Relations to make publicly available the factors it uses to determine which eligible projects to recommend for federal provincial infrastructure funding. We found the ministry included the factors used in recommending projects for federal provincial funding on its website. As a result, we considered this recommendation implemented. Our second recommendation was for the Ministry of Government Relations to require an independent review of project rating scores used to select projects to recommend for federal provincial infrastructure funding. We tested 47 projects and found the ministry required independent review of project ratings before it recommended them for funding. As a result, we considered this recommendation implemented. Our third recommendation was for the Ministry of Government Relations to consistently document rationale for key decisions made when recommending infrastructure projects for federal provincial funding. Our testing of 47 projects found the ministry sufficiently documented rationale for selecting the recommended projects. As a result, we considered this recommendation implemented. Our fourth recommendation was for the Ministry of Government Relations to determine a written strategy for notifying, within a reasonable timeframe, applicants who are unsuccessful in obtaining funding under federal provincial infrastructure programs. For ineligible projects, we found the ministry had a written process in place to inform the applicant that their project was not eligible under program guidelines. And for the 5 ineligible projects we tested, the ministry communicated with the applicants as we expected. So for unsuccessful projects, so those are projects that would have been eligible but were not selected, the ministry had an informal or undocumented strategy to inform applicants their projects were not successful. For the 33 unsuccessful projects we tested, we found the ministry informed those applicants timely via email. As a result, we considered the intent of this recommendation to be implemented. In this chapter, we also identified another matter related to the use of a different approval process for certain projects that was not made public. During our testing, we found Cabinet approved 25 projects using a different process than the government had communicated to the public in a news release, and that the Ministry of Government Relations communicated to the public in its Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program guide. We found Cabinet approved these projects prior to the ministry completing their detailed assessment and ranking of the projects. The ministry did complete a high-level assessment of these projects, determining whether the project was eligible for funding prior to Cabinet's approval and the submission of those projects for the federal government's review and approval. The government did not publicly communicate its plans or use of a different process to select these projects when it announced the approval of these projects. These 25 projects represented a total of $185.5 million in grant funding, which was approximately 30% of the total grant funding approved for the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program as of October 2020. Clearly communicating changes to the process used to evaluate and approve projects for funding can help the government demonstrate transparency and that it treated all project applications fairly and equitably. This concludes our remarks on this chapter.
Thanks so much for the report and the focus of the work. I'll turn it over to the Government Relations for a brief response. I guess first off, though, you come before us and you're dealing with recommendations from a few years back. It's wonderful to see implementation across the board here on this front, so wanting to give credit where it's due. Thanks to all those that have been involved in that work. I turn it over for a brief comment, and then we'll see if there's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly those accomplishments are a result of the folks behind me here, and the folks are behind them. So yeah, just real quickly regarding the audit of the ministry's processes to recommend infrastructure projects for federal provincial funding. As the provincial auditor did note, as of October 2020, the ministry had implemented those 4 outstanding recommendations. We do note the provincial auditor's observation on the other matter, and that more communication could have benefited applicants during the 2019 expression of interest process, and we will consider this if another expression of interest is pursued. And that concludes my remarks.
Thanks so much. Any questions from folks on this chapter? Ms. Young?
This is the first time this chapter has come back before the committee.
These have all been considered in 2018 when they first came. This is the follow-up, and then we have the report of the implementation.
Right,
So
and-
these are outstanding ones with follow-up.
Right, so, and the other matter in section 4.0 has come before the committee before?
No, that one has not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I will echo the chair's comments in terms of the good work that was done in the implementation of them, but also for transparency and accountability, I will be asking just a few questions about the other matter then in section 4.0, recognizing also that you're all here in your capacity as public servants and officials with the government of Saskatchewan. Some of these questions are about cabinet processes, so I recognizing that, I think I'll just proceed. I'm wondering, of the 25 projects that were approved, is there a list available, or is that this list of the 25 publicly available?
Those projects, I believe one of them was withdrawn, and the remaining 24 have been made public or announced publicly already. So,
As part of the full slate of projects that were approved, or would I suppose then 24 that progressed, would those be indicated anywhere differently?
yeah, actually, so there isn't a complete list of the 24, but they would be included in various news releases or backgrounds as they were rolled out and announced. So.
But for the committee or members of the public who are interested in finding out, why these 24 were prioritized, there would be no ability for anyone to establish which projects those were.
Yeah, that wouldn't be something that would be on a.
Again, I guess we'd request, so if you don't have that here today, I guess, and maybe just enlighten me why that wouldn't be able to be provided to the committee. Would it be possible, I suspect, in the coming days to just provide the 24 projects, the project to this committee?
To the committee. Yeah, certainly we can provide that list.
Thanks, and that just comes to table that properly, just comes to the clerk, and then they table it, and it's part of the committee's processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. With this different approval process not made public, were there only the 25 that were brought forward to cabinet, or was it a larger group of which than the 24, I suppose, were approved?
McDonald, our Executive Director of our Municipal Infrastructure Finance Branch, to provide some comments.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. The expression of interest resulted in over 1,400 interested applications, which was essentially names on a list, project, some basic description, and so that entire list would have been provided, and ultimately the 25 were selected.
So then forgive me, Mr. McDonald, were the 1,400 brought to cabinet, or was it just the 25 of which one was later withdrawn?
That's a good question that I wasn't there at the time. So I'm just, various lists would have been provided, but I'd have to confirm ultimately whether or not all 1,400 would have gone to cabinet. There was some, as the auditor noted, high-level analysis that was done to deem some ineligible as an example, or if the projects weren't going to meet construction timelines as an example. So there likely would have been a reduced list provided, but we'd have to confirm.
Is that something that could be done for the committee? Basically, what I'm trying to establish is how many projects were specifically brought to cabinet for approval under a different process, as opposed to essentially how many out of the 1,400?
Yeah. I think that's something that we could confirm.
Yeah, we'll certainly look into that.
Thank you. And then of the 25 that were brought, or the 24 that went forward, I'm not sure which number I should be using, so I'll use them both. Did all of them receive federal government approval?
24 of the 25 did and have been officially announced into the program. There was one of the projects that was submitted to the federal government but was deemed ineligible by the federal government, which is why it was ultimately withdrawn from the program.
Okay, so of the 25 of which we currently know were brought to cabinet for approval under a different process, the committee can be confident that they would have otherwise been successful through this funding process, or the regular funding process, pardon me.
Yeah, all but the one that was deemed ineligible by Canada ultimately, because they're the partner and they have final approval authority. So it was submitted and then sent back as ineligible.
Are you able to speak to the reasons it was deemed ineligible?
In this case, it was a landfill project with a management authority where the eligibility of the authority itself was questioned, and it had to do with ultimate ownership, and so it created an ineligibility component.
Thank you. Has this different approval process been used previously or since?
No, this was the first time the ministry had ever operated an expression of interest. And subsequent intakes under the Investing Canada Infrastructure Program have held formal intakes and gone through the process that the auditor had reviewed.
So this different process is very much the exception then. And to your knowledge then, is this a new process that with the two tiers of processes, the main expression of interest and evaluation, and then the cabinet approval? Will there be two processes going forward, or is this a one-time occurrence?
It was one time in the sense that the expression of interest was implemented when Investing Canada Infrastructure Program was announced in 2018. Because it was going to be a 10-year program and 10-year relationship with the federal government. And so the province determined that it would be good for us to get a sense of the demand, if you will, that was out there in communities. What types of projects were communities themselves prioritizing. There's a broad sweep of eligibility across the program as a whole. And so it was an opportunity to, frankly, become informed as we look to plan future intakes into the future. So the sense was to try and get a sense of that demand, where that priority might be, and help us to navigate future intakes. So it was new because of a new program opportunity, whereas in the past, some of our programs had very tight construction timelines. As an example, Clean Water Wastewater Fund came in, you had to do an intake, and projects had to be construction completed in 2 years. This gave us a much bigger time frame, and so that expression of interest was new. Whether or not it would be used again, I think I would say it depends on the nature of the programs that would come from the federal government and how long they might be or what that might look like.
And forgive me, you're speaking to the regular broader process, not the 25 projects going to cabinet?
Yeah, the 25 projects were a result of the expression of interest, so they were included within that piece. I guess the distinction between even the name, right, expression of interest, and then ultimately specific intakes. So as an example, since the expression of interest, we've run specific intakes under the green stream, under the community culture and recreation, where it narrows down the types of applications that can be made.
So for those other streams that you've listed then, to go back to my previous question, do those follow, I guess what I'm struggling to call like a regular process of an expression of interest, or are there also projects being approved by cabinet outside of the regular process? To
borrow your words, I would say that projects approved out of the subsequent intakes have been the process that was reviewed by the auditor and verified that our outstanding components had been implemented. And so all have since used that process.
So then to circle back to my initial question, then this other matter, the different approval process not made public, was thus far very much a one-time application of a process. Okay.
Deputy Chair Harder.
It seems to me that all of the projects would have gone forward to cabinet, not just the 25. That all the projects would be reviewed by cabinet and be approved, would it not?
Yeah, that's a piece we'll have to verify. I mean, the results of the expression of interest were shared, but ultimately as I said, because some of that due diligence was done, that project the list may have been weaned down, if you will, just based on eligibility as an example.
Well, yes. It wouldn't have been all 1,400, but it would have been, because out of 1,400, there would have been a number of them, a third of them probably, or 25% anyway, that were deemed very quickly ineligible by your department, and then weaned down to probably 100 projects for consideration. Would it not? If you could, that's probably one of the areas, when you get back on the other, if you could determine for us, because it seems to me that would be the protocol.
I think there was an undertaking to provide that information. I heard a good question again on that front. So as an additional piece to supply through the clerk, you are confident that you can provide that information as well, correct?
Yeah, we'll certainly look at that and determine how we can present that information, because like I said, there is no list, I guess, of the 1,400 or 25, I guess, if you will, or 24 that exists publicly, and so we'll have to go back and see what we can put together.
Part of the problem, I don't know, maybe I'm missing something here, but so I would suspect you'll have that information.
Yes.
And then if we can now, at this stage of accountability, there was a process that wasn't followed. If that information can now be provided to this committee, that's our role. And when processes aren't followed, that's when we get engaged. So we'd appreciate that information, and it will provide some clarity, I think.
Yeah, we'll certainly endeavor to do that.
Okay.
On that, in regards to the 24 projects that were ultimately successful through the different approval process, for the officials present, are these projects that you're able to say with confidence would have been amongst those on the list whittled down had they gone through the traditional process? These are 24 projects that would have been otherwise, I assume, recommended by the ministry for approval?
Yeah, two parts to me. When we're reviewing projects, eligibility becomes the first screen, so making sure that it's eligible under the program. So that's often a way to decipher, right? And then the prioritization in terms of the scoring and comparison that we do across projects. My team and I, we endeavor to give a sense of comparison, but really all projects are good projects, and we say that to communities, right? They're the number one priority for a community. That's why they submitted it as a project. And so ultimately these projects were deemed eligible in the sense of the priority. They would have gone through a prioritization exercise, they would have, but and could have, if you will. So my simple answer would be yes. I think I'd have no concerns in terms of them being considered as part of this funding program. Where they would have ended up on the priority list is due to a bunch of factors.
That's kind of to the nature of my question is, especially hearing what you've said about all of the needs of communities in the province, and that all projects are good projects. The accountability piece around ensuring whether these 24 projects were ultimately the best 24 that would have met all of the criteria had they gone through the mainstream process, and they didn't, bump potentially 24 other very good projects from other communities off the list.
Any further questions? Good exchange. So thanks for the undertakings to get that information back to us in a timely way through the clerk's office. That'll be tabled. And not seeing any other questions, I would welcome a motion to conclude consideration of Chapter 16. Moved by Mr. Harrison. All agreed? That's carried. And we'll move along to the final direct chapter for government relations, and I'll turn it over to the auditor.
Thank you. Chapter 25 of our 2021 report, Volume 2, starting on page 191, reports the results of our follow-up audit on proposing education property tax mill rates as of July of 2021. Our first outstanding recommendation was for the Ministry of Government Relations to document its rationale for decisions made on which education property tax mill rates to propose. The Ministry of Government Relations clearly documented its rationale for selecting education property tax mill rate options proposed to Treasury Board, including why the ministry chose to propose the options it did and pros and cons of each proposed option. We also found the ministry held regular discussions internally and with senior staff at the Ministry of Finance related to why it chose certain options over other potential options. As a result, we considered this recommendation to be implemented. Our second recommendation was for the Ministry of Government Relations to include the impact of potential changes in key assumptions, property growth rates, and more information on economic and social impacts when proposing education property tax mill rate options to decision makers. We found the ministry provided appropriate information on economic and social impacts when proposing education property tax mill rate options to decision makers. It included discussion of the general impact of certain proposed options on municipalities, some of the economic impacts of the proposed options, and some information about proposed options' social impacts in its Education Property Tax 2021 mill rate options paper. As a result, we considered this recommendation to be implemented. That concludes our remarks on this chapter.
Thanks so much for the presentation. This committee's concurred with these recommendations and considered them in 2018. Appreciate the implementation on this front. Are there brief comments before we see if there's any questions?
Yeah, just quickly, Provincial Auditor, as you heard, found that in July 2021, Ministry implemented those two outstanding recommendations, and our EPT mill rate process manual and EPT mill rate options paper were revised to address those. So I'll leave my remarks at that.
Thanks so much. Any questions from committee members? Ms. Young?
Thanks. One super quick question. Outside of the note about the separate school divisions and their ability to pass bylaws setting their own mill rates, I don't see any discussion in this chapter about consultation with school divisions. Is that something that is undertaken by the ministry when it reevaluates mill rate?
Yeah, in terms of consultation with school divisions, we don't consult ahead of time. We do inform them afterwards, what the mill rates were. So.
Any further questions? I'm not seeing any. I'd welcome a motion to conclude consideration of Chapter 25, moved by Deputy Chair Hargrave. All agreed? That's carried. We'll move along now to the Northern Municipal Trust account. And Chapter 1 will be focused on first. Oh, we're going to do them all together. That sounds great. And there's one new recommendation within them. I'll turn it over to our provincial auditor.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, Deputy Chair, committee members and officials. With me is Carolyn O'Quinn, Assistant Provincial Auditor, who was previously responsible for the portfolio of work that did include the Northern Municipal Trust account and the chapters being considered. We will present all three chapters together as they do relate to an annual integrated audits for the Northern Municipal Trust account. There is one new recommendation for the committee's consideration. I do want to thank management and staff at the Northern Municipal Trust account for their cooperation that has been extended to us during the course of our audits. I'll now turn it over to Carolyn.
Thank you, Tara. So the 3 chapters mentioned that I will be discussing include the results of our annual integrated audits of the Northern Municipal Trust account for the years ending December 31st, 2018, December 31st, 2019, and December 31st of 2020. Chapter 1 of our 2020 report, Volume 1, starting on page 19, reports the results of our follow-up on 4 outstanding recommendations we previously made to the committee. Our first outstanding recommendation was for management to carry out a detailed review of quarterly and year-end financial information prepared by staff responsible for recording Northern Municipal Trust account financial information. While we did find some improvements were made in this area during 2018, 2019, and 2020, we found the reviews conducted were not completed in sufficient detail. As a result, the Trust accounts 2018, 2019, and 2020 accounting records and financial statements prepared for audit contained numerous errors. We also found staff were not appropriately following key policies when reviewing and approving bank reconciliations and journal entries and pursuing a collection of accounts receivable. Without adequate supervision, including detailed review of the financial information used to prepare the financial statements, the ministry may not detect and correct within a reasonable time frame errors in the Trust accounts financial records. As reported in Chapter 6 of our 2021 report, Volume 2, at December 31st, 2020, this recommendation remained partially implemented. Our second outstanding recommendation was for the Ministry of Government Relations to adequately segregate duties of employees responsible for key accounting functions of the Northern Municipal Trust account. In 2018, 2019, and 2020, we found the ministry assigned staff responsibility for what we considered to be incompatible duties. For example, we noted multiple instances where one staff member received money, prepared bank deposits, and recorded financial transactions in the Trust accounts accounting system. We also noted a number of instances in 2020 where one employee completed most of the payment processes. Not properly segregating responsibilities assigned to staff does increase the risk of undetected fraud and error, including inappropriate adjustments to accounting records. As reported in Chapter 6 of our 2021 report, Volume 2, at December 31st, 2020, this recommendation remained partially implemented. Our third outstanding recommendation was for the Ministry of Government Relations to prepare timely and accurate bank reconciliations for the Trust account as its policies require. Back in 2018, we found that staff did not always prepare bank reconciliations before the end of the following month as its policies required. 5 out of 12 of the reconciliations were prepared between 4 and 23 days late. Completing these reconciliations as close as possible to the period end is important, as it enables identification of, and if necessary, expedited follow-up of differences and corrections. Our 2019 audit found that management did prepare and approve each of the monthly bank reconciliations timely as its policies required, so we concluded in our 2019 audit that recommendation was implemented. Our fourth recommendation was for the Ministry of Government Relations to provide the Trust accounts annual report to the Legislative Assembly in accordance with the timeline set in the Executive Government Administration Act. We found the ministry did not table the Trust accounts 2015 through 2020 annual reports in accordance with these timelines. The lateness ranged from 5 months late to 22 months late. Difficulties in preparing accurate financial statements for the audit did delay completion of the annual reports. So not tabling the annual reports within the established timelines set out in legislation results in legislators not having the sufficient detail to monitor the Trust accounts operations. As reported in Chapter 6 of our 2021 report, Volume 2, at December 31st, 2020, this recommendation remained not implemented. So in addition to those 4 recommendations that were previously considered by the committee, we did make one new recommendation in our 2020 report, Volume 2, Chapter 5. On page 42 of that report, we recommended the Ministry of Government Relations clarify the legislative authority to make grants from the Northern Municipal Trust account to northern municipalities for landfills that are not wholly owned by the ministry. We found the Ministry of Government Relations made grant payments from the trust account for expansion of a landfill without the clear legislative authority to do so. In 2019, the Ministry of Government Relations approved a program that provided funding of up to $4.9 million relating to construction costs for the expansion of the Lac La Ronge Regional Landfill. Between 2019 and 2021, the ministry paid approximately $4.4 million from the trust account for this program and recorded this amount as a waste management operating expense. We determined that $2.8 million of these amounts was not operating expense, but was a grant, as the amounts paid benefited municipalities that were not part of the Northern Saskatchewan Administration District. The ministry agreed with this assessment. As of September 2021, neither the Northern Municipalities Act 2010 nor the Northern Municipalities Regulations provided clear authority for the trust account to make grants for landfills. Ministry staff consulted with legal counsel in October of 2020, who indicated that existing legislation was likely insufficient authority to make these landfill grant payments. Management indicated they're working on preparing updated regulations to provide clear authority to make landfill grants. Making such grant payments without the clear legislative authority increases the risk of making payments that could be inconsistent with the mandate of the trust account. As reported in Chapter 6 of our 2021 report, Volume 2, at December 31st, 2020, this recommendation was not implemented. This concludes our presentation of these 3 chapters.
Thank you for the presentation with the 3 chapters in the area of focus. We have 1 new recommendation, of course, before, some that are partially completed, some that have been there's been more action on. Would you care to offer any brief comments before we open up for questions?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I would just note that that the provincial auditor found that for all 3 years, 2018, 2019, and 2020, found that the financial statements are reliable and were reliable, and that the ministry complied with authorities governing the Northern Municipal Trust accounts activities related to financial reporting, safeguarding public resources, revenue raising, spending, borrowing, and investing, except as noted by the provincial auditor, and also that but the provincial auditor concluded that the ministry had effective rules and procedures for NMTA to safeguard public resources. Again, except for those noted by the provincial auditor. I am pleased to see that the provincial auditor, has considered the recommendation on the bank reconciliations completed, and so with the 4 remaining recommendations carried forward. Just to summarize them, provincial auditor did find that the ministry partially implemented 2 recommendations, that being not always preparing accurate quarterly year-end financial information, and second one, adequately segregating duties of employees responsible for key accounting functions. And then the remaining 2 recommendations of not tabling the annual report within required timelines and legislative authority to make grant payments from the NMTA to northern municipalities for landfills not wholly owned by the ministry are not yet implemented. Would like to note that the ministry tabled the 2020 financial statements in the Legislative Assembly on April 25th, 2022, and the ministry agrees with the recommendations made by the provincial auditor. We did create a segregation of duties matrix in 2021. We've hired sufficient staff, that being a director of finance and accounting, as well as an assistant accounting manager to perform those segregation of duties outlined in that matrix. And the ministry considers that recommendation of adequately segregating duties to be implemented now. And that concludes my remarks on the recommendations.
Thanks for the work and for the update. I'll open it up for questions. Ms. Young.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Being cognizant of the time, just a couple quick questions on the unclear authority for landfill expansion grant payments. Just to make sure the committee understand, essentially these these funds are being used for the development of a landfill that will impact communities that don't contribute to the trust through taxation revenue, and that's part of the issue here.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, communities that are not part of that Northern Saskatchewan Administration District.
Thank you. And I note on page 37 of Chapter 6, it's indicated that the ministry expects to benefit from the planned landfill expansion as it owns part of the regional landfill. Is this a financial benefit that the ministry will be realizing?
Yeah, there won't be any financial benefit. It's operational through the NMTA and that. So.
Okay, so sorry, can you clarify for me, or perhaps the auditor, what is meant by benefit?
Yeah, so from our perspective, what that is with regards to is just improved service delivery to those communities that utilize that landfill.
Okay, thanks. And the current state of any contemplated changes to regulations or legislation to address this recommendation?
Yeah, currently we are looking at whether or not legislative authority exists in other pieces of legislation, and if that does not exist, we will come forward with amendments to the regulations.
Thank you. And in the interim, forgive me, I'm not clear if there's more additional funding expected to flow in the absence of.
As a result of that project? Mm-hmm. That project? So for that specific project, it is complete, and it was completed July. And but however, there are some other landfill projects in that sort of northeast part of the province that we will be looking at as well. So.
Okay, so there will potentially be additional funding flowing out of the trust in the absence of clarified responsibilities through legislation or.
Yeah. Sorry, it's been a long day. Yeah, no, absolutely. We would make sure that there was authorities in place before we did any more payments out of that fund for those purposes. Yeah.
Thanks.
Mr. Nerlin.
Mr. Chair, a quick question with respect to your comment about except as noted. It strikes me that a lot of the issues raised by the auditor were pretty fundamental, pretty basic accounting principles with respect to management of trust funds. Was there a human resource issue here, or what happened that brought this all about? Thank you.
Yeah, we certainly did have some staffing challenges through, I would say, a number of years there. Just attracting and retaining some of the professionals or some of those with the expertise to perform those duties. So, I can certainly have Brad provide more information, but there were some human resource challenges that we were dealing with. And I would say generally that may be sort of the case, for our La Ronge office and sort of some of those northern operations. We do find that a challenge. So.
Thank you.
Good questions, and I think we all look forward to seeing the follow-up here with implementation across the board on these fronts. Thanks to the good folks, the leadership that's come before us here today. Thanks for all your work on these fronts. With respect to the new recommendation in Chapter 5, I would welcome a motion to concur and note progress. Moved by Deputy Chair Hargrave. All agreed? That's carried. With respect to Chapters 1 and 6, I would welcome a recommendation to conclude consideration. Moved by Deputy Chair Hargrave. All agreed? That's agreed. Thank you again, Deputy Minister Denaire, for being here today, all the officials for your work. Thanks as well for expressing where your hearts and minds and your efforts are today and in the days to come. And would you have a brief parting comment our way before we kick you out of here?
Sure, I'll keep it real quick here. Just thank you to you, Mr. Chair, and all committee members for your questions and comments today. As we address the Provincial Auditor's recommendations here, I want to thank Provincial Auditor's Office for the work they do and the professionalism in which they do that, and a big thank you to my staff at the Ministry of Government Relations. Happens to be my favorite ministry, but for all the work that they do for our great province. So thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, folks, thanks to all the committee members for their engagement here today, of course, to the auditor and the auditor's office, all the leadership there, and to our clerks, those in Hansard, and to those, making us look good on TV and making our voices heard. Thanks to everybody. Today, I would welcome a motion of adjournment. Moved by Mr. Harrison. All agreed? This committee stands adjourned to the call of the chair.